Welcome to Mr. Marr's Lockdown History. Quick 2-minute summaries of a range of different history topics. In today's episode we're going back to the time of the First World War, and we're looking at the issue of protests during the war. It's often wrongly assumed that the British public simply went along with everything that the government and other organisations said at this time without complaint, but in fact this isn't true. In the first place, many people were against the war itself, or conscription, which was when men were forced to fight. Some MPs spoke against these measures and even voted against them in Parliament. Other groups such as trade unions and people who'd been part of the suffragettes also protested. Towns and cities across Britain at different times saw rallies and marches against elements of the war. This included in places such as Glasgow Green, where men such as John Maclean would be arrested and sent to prison for their role in such complaints and protests. There was other reasons people were unhappy during the war as well. The Defence of the Realm Act was a prominent law that was passed at this time. This included a variety of measures that impacted on people's everyday lives and freedoms, including stopping people buying rounds of alcohol in pubs, or censoring the information that they could find out. It's worth noting though most people ultimately did go along with this law, and the arrests that took place were generally for breaking the rules, rather than against the law itself. There was also a range of rent and workplace strikes during the war. Some landlords took the war as an opportunity to significantly increase the rent that was paid in their properties, and many people protested by refusing to pay rent. This was especially famously in 1915 in the Clydeside area of the west of Scotland, when tens of thousands of people refused to pay rent, and this eventually led the government to pass a law stopping major rent increases. There was also workplace strikes as well, where people would take part in protests to either stop poor working conditions or to get higher wages. There was sometimes other reasons behind these strikes as well. One prominent example was in the Vickers gun factory in 1917, when a protest threatened to get out of hand, and it came close to members of the trade unions who'd led the protests being threatened with arrest and imprisonment. There was other reasons people complained as well, and food was a key part of this. Especially towards the end of the war, many people began to suffer from food shortages and problems, and because of this, there was marches and rallies and protests about this. One prominent example was in Glasgow, where a so-called potato march took place, where women protested not simply against the food shortages, but against the war itself. In more extreme cases, food shortages elsewhere in Britain also led to riots and other civil disobedience.